Welcome to another episode of Out from the Horrorbox. I'm your Craven host, Dom, and we continue our look at the franchise that Freddy built, Nightmare on Elm Street. We take a look at the next three installments of the franchise. We start with 1987's A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, move to 1988's A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, Dream Master, and end at 1989's A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, Dream Child. And honestly, I did not realize that they came out back to back to back. It's like, that's kind of crazy. But we left off after A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, which failed to live up to the success of the first film. New Line Cinema was unsure if it would continue with the series. Wes Craven had stepped away from the franchise, and the subtext of the second film became overt text. Originally, Craven did not want the film to evolve into a franchise, but due to dissatisfaction with Freddy's Revenge, he signed on to co-write the screenplay for the third installment. He was unavailable to direct, as he was tied up with filming Deadly Friend at the same time, with the intention that it would end the series. This is going to end everything all for one on the third movie. Well, let's see how that goes. Alright, so Craven's first concept for the film was that Freddy Krueger invade the real world. Krueger would haunt the actors filming a new Nightmare on Elm Street sequel. And New Line Cinema really didn't like this. They rejected it. The meta-cinematic idea, which to them probably was not even a concept or anything, they just rejected it outright. What years later, we'll see. Craven's concept would be brought to the screen with A New Nightmare. But before the script was finalized in 1986, John Saxon and Robert Englund actually wrote their own scripts for the third Nightmare film. But I think they did them separately. I don't think they did them. The scripts weren't together. They didn't come together to write a script. It was two separate scripts. So in Saxon's script, which would be a prequel story called How the Nightmare on Elm Street All Began, Freddy is ultimately innocent, or at least set up for the murders by the main culprits, Charles Manson and the Manson family. Freddy is forced by a mob of angry parents to confess to the crimes, which enrages them further. And then, after lynching Freddy, he comes back to avenge his wrongful death by targeting the mob's children. And in Englund's treatment, Freddy's Funhouse, the protagonist is Tina Gray's older sister, who is away at college when Tina was murdered and returns to Springwood to investigate how she died. Freddy had claimed the 1428 Elm Street house for his own in the dream world, setting up booby traps like Nancy had done against him. According to Englund, after the script had been unused for years, part of it was used in the pilot episode for Freddy's Nightmares, which I'll get to in probably the next episode. It won't be in this one. Wes Craven has said about the franchise guidance by he and Bruce Wagner that they decided that it could no longer be one person fighting Freddy. It had to be a group because the souls of Freddy's victims have made Freddy stronger. He also called Heather Langenkamp to ask her if he may include her character Nancy in the script, which she agreed to. In interviews with the cast and crew on the DVD extras, it's revealed that the original idea for the film centered around the kids separately traveling to a specific location to die by suicide, and then later be discovered that the common link between the youths is that they dreamed of Freddy Krueger. Since suicide was a taboo issue, especially at that time, I think before we started getting into people's mental health and started making that a priority, at least somewhat that we do now, the storyline was abandoned. Some aspects of the idea remain in the film, obviously. In Craven and Wagner's original script, the characters were somewhat different from what they eventually came to be. Nancy was neither a dream expert nor a mental health professional. Kristen, named Kirsten in the script, which I could see how it could switch around, and like at one point maybe they started with Kirsten and then it just switched over to Kristen. Only was in the institution for a brief time. She had a father and mother named Alice. So her mother was named Alice. Sorry. Neil's last name was Guinness, and his character was much younger. Dr. Sims' last name was Madalena? Weird. Taryn was African American. Joey was the one who built the model of a house and had trouble getting around, although he did not use a wheelchair. And Philip was a 13-year-old. Will's name was originally Laredo and had long hair, did not use a wheelchair, and was the one who made clay puppets also. The script also described that the ranch house where Krueger was born, and that this is the house that would show up in the kids' dreams, rather than the Elm Street house, the house that Nancy used to live in. Wes Craven specified that the house in the original script had to be an architectural portal to Freddy's dreamscape. It is virtually a limitless world of the human psyche in all of its dimensions. So you can enter the other world through the house, or dreams, or madness, or hallucinations, or special psychic states that various people have. Don Thompson would have known from the start that Krueger was real and still alive. Krueger was missing, and Nancy wanted to find him. When she finds him, Nancy learns that Krueger is obsessed with finding the house where he was born so he could burn it down. And also with that original script, there was more of a romance between Nancy and Neil, and eventually they have sex in that original script. There are like scenes and lines that make it reminiscent of that first original script, but eventually they just kind of cut that out to make it obviously more streamlined. There's no mention that Krueger's mother had been a nun, or that Freddy was born of rape. Both Joey and Kincaid are killed off. The deaths in script are more grotesque. Krueger was not as talkative, and he was more vulgar. Freddy is, which honestly I could completely see, because I feel like that's what Wes Craven originally, because like if you look back at the first one, he is more vulgar and he's more, he's less talkative, and you can tell like that's kind of what, as the sequels go on, you'll see how it changes. Freddy is killed by Nancy by using his own glove, not by holy water, and she sees through his shape-shifting trick, even though she still dies. Then on the Never Sleep Again, the Elm Street Legacy, that was a documentary that came out, director Chuck Russell stated that Craven's original script was darker and more profane, and Rachel Talalay thought that the script seemed like a $20 million script. Discussing the more humorous elements in the film, Russell said, "I looked at what the series creator Wes Craven did and said, this is absolutely great and terrifying. But I felt that at the time I came along on 3, the way to go was to make the whole idea of dreams and nightmares into a carnival, and go further into the dreams and make Freddy Krueger more outrageous and add more of an element of dark humor. That worked, and the series went in that direction from then on." One of the most memorable scenes in the film is the sequence that takes place in the junkyard during the film's climax. The junkyard sequence, the set itself, were the product of art director Mick Strawn, who also handled some of the film's special effects sequences and became production designer on the sequel. So now let's get into Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors.
He's horribly burned. He has razors on his right hand. Man of my dreams. He's real, isn't he? He's real. Let go of him, you bastard. Oh my God.
About a year after the events of A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, teenager Kristen Parker, played by Patricia Arquette, dreams that Freddy Krueger, continued to be played by Robert Englund, is chasing her. He attacks her in the bathroom after she thinks she is already awoken, making it look like she has slit her wrist in the real world. Her mother, played by Brooke Bundy, enters her room to discover these cuts and, believing Kristen to be suicidal, admits her to the Weston Hills Psychiatric Hospital. Here she's placed under the care of Dr. Neil Gordon, played by Craig Wasson. At the hospital, Kristen fights the orderlies who try to sedate her because she fears falling asleep. The new intern therapist, Nancy Thompson, continued to be played by Heather Langenkamp, calms her down and befriends her by reciting part of Freddy's nursery rhyme. Nancy is introduced to the rest of Dr. Gordon's patients. Philip, played by Bradley Gregg, a habitual sleepwalker. Kincaid, played by Ken Sagos, a tough kid from the streets who is prone to violence. Jennifer, played by Penelope Sundro, a hopeful television actress who is prone to cigarette burns. Will, played by Ira Hidden, who uses a wheelchair due to a prior suicide attempt. Taryn, played by Jennifer Rubin, a recovering drug addict. And Joey, the youngest, played by Rodney Eastman, who is too traumatized to speak. One night, Freddy attacks Kristen in her dreams, but she unwittingly pulls Nancy into her dream, allowing them to escape. Kristen reveals that she has been able to pull people into her dreams since she was young. The next night, Freddy enters Philip's dreams as one of Philip's puppets. Freddy appears as himself and causes his nerves to come out as strings. Freddy guides Philip to the top of a tower and throws Philip off. The night after, Jennifer asks orderly Max, played by Lawrence Fishburne, to allow her to stay up and watch TV. He agrees and leaves. Jennifer is watching TV and comes across the Dick Cavett Show with guest Zsa Zsa Gabor. They are both played by themselves, respectfully. The TV starts to act up and Jennifer goes to check on it. Freddy morphs out of the TV and kills Jennifer by smashing her head into the TV screen. In their next group session, Nancy reveals to the remaining patients that they are the last of the Elm Street kids, the surviving children of those who banded together and burned Krueger to death many years ago. Both Nancy and Neil encourage them to try hypnosis so they can experience a shared dream and discover their dream powers. In the dream, Joey wanders off in the hall and sees Nurse Marcy, played by Stacey Alden, enticing him to come with her inside her room. He follows, and she seduces him, undressing and kissing him until her face transforms and she shoves her very long demonic tongue into his mouth, suffocating him. It was Freddy all along in disguise, who then captures him, leaving him comatose in the real world. The dean is furious, and Nancy and Neil are relieved of duty. A nun named Sister Mary Helen, played by Nan Martin, tells Neil that Freddy is the son of a young woman on the hospital staff who was accidentally locked in a room with hundreds of mental patients who raped her continually. She explains that the only way to stop him is to lay his bones to rest. He and Nancy ask her father, Officer Donald Thompson, who is still played by John Saxon, where the bones are hidden, but he is uncooperative. Nancy rushes back to the hospital when she learns that Kristen has been sedated. Neil stays behind to convince Donald to help them. Nancy and the others again engage in group hypnosis to reunite with Kristen, but they are all separated by Freddy. Taryn and Will are killed by Freddy, while Kristen, Nancy, and Kincaid find one another. The trio rescues Joey, but are unable to defeat Freddy because he has become too powerful due to the souls he has absorbed. Sensing that his remains have been found, Freddy appropriates his own skeleton and kills Donald before incapacitating Neil. Freddy returns to attack the others, but Joey uses his dream power voice to repel him. Donald tells Nancy that he is crossing over, but is revealed to be Freddy and stabs Nancy in her stomach, tossing her aside. Freddy, believing that Nancy is dead, comes upon Kristen in order to kill her, but a still alive Nancy stabs him with his own glove. Neil manages to recover and purifies Freddy's bones, killing him. After Nancy dies, Kristen manages to awaken everyone and return them to the real world. During Nancy's funeral, Neil finds Amanda Kruger's tombstone and discovers that she is Sister Mary Helen. That evening, he goes to sleep with the Malaysian doll Nancy gave him in Kristen's papier-mâché house nearby. Suddenly, Kristen's house lights up from inside, suggesting that Freddy is not completely defeated. Now let us move on to some trivia about the film, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, and learn some things about the behind the scenes, the production, and the actors. So Ken Sagos stated in an interview that he really didn't want to audition for the role of Kincaid, but his agent talked him into going. On the day of the audition, he walked in heavy rain to catch a bus to the location. He showed up completely drenched and had to sit and wait for hours due to the auditions running late. When it was his turn, director Chuck Russell told him, "Do whatever you want to do." Sagos was so frustrated and mad about the whole ordeal that he yelled, "Fuck you!" and then proceeded to scream and cuss out Russell. Russell immediately hired him, which is good. Like, I like when, actors give like a genuine performance like that. Like, he took his actual emotions and like it worked for the character. Obviously this is gonna work, and obviously Chuck Russell saw that and was like, yeah, that's happened with like a lot of things, like where one thing I know I bring up Lost a lot, but like that happened with Lost. I think it was what's his name, Sawyer, I can't, oh my god, Josh Holloway, his character, because he auditioned for a bunch of other characters. I think he auditioned for like Jack and like Charlie's character, and when he auditioned for Sawyer's character, because Sawyer's character was supposed to be completely like a big city slick con man and stuff like that, but then, because I think he like got frustrated and like hit a chair and and then his country accent came out, and as he was yelling and cussing, and they're like, "Oh yeah, do that." They liked that for Sawyer, and eventually the character became that, like more of like what Josh Holloway actually was like. And I like when they do that. I love when they, they can see the actors and they can see how they're actually going to perform, and they tell them, be more of yourself, because that's more of a genuine performance than anything you could have done. According to Wes Craven, he decided early on that there had to be a group of people fighting Freddy, because the souls of his previous victims had made him too strong for one person alone. The idea for the mental hospital treating the Dream Warriors was not just some riff on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but instead inspired by real life establishments. At the time, this is from Wes Craven, there was a kind of movement of such places that even advertised on TV. Send us your troubled child and we'll make them okay. And essentially, they were like prisons or insane asylums. Which, yeah, there was a whole push during like that 80s, like satanic panic, to get like, the youth, the kids are not right. It was from like the late 80s to the early 90s. There's like this, like what are your kids doing? What are your, like, it was like this whole thing, and there's a whole industry for this, like he said, of like trying to like fix kids by having them like go to these like, not even like camps, but like they were led to like these like asylums or like prisons essentially, and made to do like labor and made to do this or that. They were treated so awful, and they were abused mentally and physically, and just so that like in the name of we're gonna fix these troubled kids, because that's the only way to fix them is through, treating them like this. And it's like, well, now we've at least learned that like that does not help at all, and actually can make things worse for people. When the clay puppet's face turns into Freddy's, special effects man Doug Beswick used stop-motion animation. Filming began with the clay Freddy face that was made plainer in each frame. The result was then run backwards, and that's what appears in the final cut of the film, which honestly makes a lot of sense. Like you start off like super detailed, and then you just kind of smooth it out as it goes, and you just run that footage backwards. I mean, that happens a lot, like with special effects. Like a lot of what I love about special effects in films is that sometimes it could be something as simple as that. Like we learned in when we talked about Nightmare on Elm Street. It's like it was a simple, like the scene of Freddy pressing through the wall was a simple, and without CGI, as simple as like taking I think a bed sheet and just, or like a plastic sheet. I don't remember what it exactly was. I think it was like a bed sheet or like a sheet or something, and just pulling that taut or tight against the wall, and then having him push through it so as not to rip it, but like it makes it look like, and you get this incredible effect of like that still holds up to today, of like him pressing through the wall, and it looks like he's coming through the wall, but not like enough that like he's gonna push, like pierce through it. And it's like I said, it still holds up today, and it's honestly a great effect. For the dream sequence in which Dick Cavett is interrupted by Freddy Krueger, Sally Kellerman was originally in the script as the guest, but Cavett was then allowed to pick the person he'd been interviewing. He picked Zsa Zsa Gabor because he thought she was the dumbest person he'd ever met in his life, and he'd never have her on his show in real life. So if there was one person he'd want to see killed by Freddy, it would be her, which is kind of like fucked up when you think about it. It's like, damn, you hate this person's, or well, not that he hates her, but like you think so low of her that you're like, yeah, let's bring her on. I don't ever want her on my fucking show for real, but let's get her on so then she can be killed by Freddy. Kind of messed up, but it was kind of funny though too. I love how, like, I'm talking about like Dick Cavett and Zsa Zsa Gabor as if like the audience now, like, I mean, I feel like if you're my age, you still kind of know who these people are, but like younger people listening, Dick Cavett was kind of like a Jimmy Kimmel or a Jimmy Fallon. Like they had like a late night show and people would come on. Zsa Zsa Gabor was just like a older actress at the time. She's known for like her accent and all that. So that's, I mean, you can always look them up, but yeah, like it's like it's so weird that like these movies have such like dated exactly dated references that some other horror films don't have. I think the Nightmare on Elm Street has a lot of like, not like the first two obviously, but like more as you get along, it's gonna have some very dated things, and you'll see. This movie was intended to be the last Nightmare on Elm Street, and was scripted that way. While the final shot of Dr. Gordon sleeping and the light inside the miniature house suddenly goes on, seems to suggest that Freddy may not be entirely dead. In the shooting script, it makes it clear that this was not what the original intention was supposed to be. An additional scene, Dr. Gordon visits Kristen a few days after Freddy's defeat. Kristen reveals that she's moving to New York, and Dr. Gordon asks if she's going to see her, referring to Nancy, in her dreams. Kristen answers that she dreams of her every night, suggesting that Nancy guards her dreams. The scene then cuts to the ending, which plays out in the finished film as it was scripted, implying that Nancy, not Freddy, turns on the light as she is guarding Gordon's dreams as well. It's unknown if the preceding scene was shot, but leaving the scene out and adding an ominous musical cue like they did makes it appear as if Freddy's still alive. And honestly, I think that could have been a better ending, to have it as Nancy, and kind of makes more sense because it's like, okay, so she died, Freddy's to rest, and she's there to guard the dream in case, he does come back or something like that. But obviously, when you have a film franchise on your hand and you want to make more money, especially with this one, which was supposed to come back as like a kind of start over, a clean slate for the series. I mean, other than what Wes Craven wanted to end it, like New Line obviously were like, let's just keep going. So they obviously were influencing that ending of keeping him more, ambiguous and more Freddy is still alive. Robert Englund improvised quite a few of Freddy Krueger's one-liners, but the best-known example happened in the scene where Freddy emerged from the television set and killed Jennifer by smashing her head into it. For this scene, his line in the script was, "This is it, Jennifer, your big break on TV." Robert Englund said this line for 2 takes, and on the 3rd take, when Chuck Russell went for an alternate angled shot, Robert Englund changed it to, "Welcome to primetime, bitch." Chuck Russell couldn't decide which version to use, so he edited the two together. The different camera angle made it easy to edit the 2 lines together, obviously, because now you have 2 different angles and him saying it. So you don't have to try and pick and choose. And it became probably Freddy's defining one-liner, which, yes, I would say, honestly, there's one that, like, most people remember will probably be that. Like, that one-liner of, "Welcome to primetime, bitch." And I think it kind of sets up the idea of Freddy being very quippy later, especially as we'll see in the next couple sequels, because the first one he was like, oh yeah, he said a couple things here and there, right, in the first one. Great. The second one, maybe he said a little quip here and there. He's like, I got the brains, you got the bod, or whatever. So it's a little, okay, we're starting to push into that realm of it getting a little cheesy. Here, it starts getting a little bit more like that, like, "Welcome to primetime, bitch," like, a little bit more ridiculous. And we'll see, it just keeps going from there. Wes Craven's and Bruce Wagner's original script opened with Freddy's birth in a ranch-style house, where infant Freddy cuts himself out of his mother's belly. Craven described the ranch as an architectural portal to Freddy's dreamscape. This is where the dream warriors end up in their dreams, rather than the house at 1428 Elm Street. It is gradually revealed that Freddy used to bring his child victims to this ranch, which became the source of his powers, explaining how he can keep coming back. Only Neil and Kristen survived the climax, but they manage to set the real building on fire. Afterwards, Kristen takes Freddy's knife glove hand thing and uses her powers to go back in time to Freddy's birth. The monstrous infant Freddy tries to kill her, so after slamming the baby against the wall many times to no avail, she finally stabs him to death with the glove. Not only was the screenplay much darker, profane, and horrific, would have been far too costly to produce. And director Chuck Russell and writer Frank Darabont toned down much of this by changing the characters, most of the key scenes taking place in the dream world, and Freddy's backstory, while adding a lot of dark humor. And yeah, I mean, that would have been insane to do. Like, why, like, how does she have the power to go back in time? And then she's killing an infant. I mean, I guess it's a monster infant, which we'll kind of see kind of later. But still, it's like, what? I still think it's a little weird that, like, that's kind of where Wes Craven wanted to take it. I mean, if you wanted to end it, man, I guess that's one way of ending it. Kill Counter. Now we've arrived at the kill counter. This is the part of the podcast where we go through the kills and deaths in the film. In this fourth installment of Nightmare on Elm Street, there are a total of 6 kills. Not too many in this installment, but let's look at the kills. The first death is Philip. Freddy pulls out his tendons and walks him off the building, cutting the strings or the tendons and letting him fall to his death. Next up was Jennifer. She has her head smashed in by a TV by Freddy, who's morphed into the TV. She gets to stay up a little bit later watching TV by Lawrence Fishburne's character, and she tries to stay awake. She even burns herself with a cigarette to make sure she's still awake, and then unfortunately she falls asleep. Then once in the dream realm, to save Kristen, Taryn gets injected with a lethal overdose of drugs because Freddy he turns his hands into syringes in the dream world and just injects her and overdoses her with drugs. It's kind of crazy. And then Will, he's the wizard or whatever, but then he gets stabbed in the chest by Freddy's finger knives. He takes him out pretty easy. Next, we have Don Thompson. As he goes to dig up Freddy's bones, he's attacked by the reanimated skeleton of Freddy. Donald is impaled through the back with metal junk, and he ends up dying. Nancy Thompson is the last death in the film. And in the dream realm, she sees her father, Don, who tells her he's crossing over. This obviously turns out to be Freddy in disguise, and he stabs Nancy in the gut with his finger knives. That's where it sets up that he thinks she's dead, but then she ends up coming back and taking him out. And I mean, I never really thought Nightmare on Elm Street had a lot of kills to begin with. I mean, the first one, I think there's 3, 4 if you count the mom, but I don't know, the ending's kind of weird and ambiguous because then they're all back or whatever, but I never compared him to a Jason or a Michael where he just would go on a rampage of killing people, a bunch of people. He's specifically targeting certain people, certain kids, actually. And so, he never really has, a high amount of kills. But, I mean, 6 is pretty good. Especially since the last couple, there weren't too many. So, the third installment of the Nightmare on Elm Street, Dream Warriors, was a financial and somewhat of a success by critics. You know, some people were it's kind of mixed. You know, audiences obviously love it. You know, some people saying, you know, like, this is the best of the franchise. It stands out amongst, you know, some of the others. And with that, they decided, let's just keep going. So, a Nightmare on Elm Street franchise originator, Wes Craven, presented his own pitch for a fourth film, but producer Sarah Risher and Robert Shea turned it down, instead going with the Dream Master pitch as a progression of the Dream Warriors concept from the previous film. Risher explained that I approached Wes for an idea for the fourth film. I always go to Wes first for each time. His idea was illogical. It was about time travel within dreams that broke all the rules of the dreams. We decided not to go with that. Well, we decided to go with William Constwinkle's Dream Master idea, which we thought was terrific. I told Wes we were doing that. Shea felt that Craven's idea did not have the impact the producers were looking for. Craven and his writing partner, Bruce Wagner, were later contacted about doing rewrites for the script, but turned down the offer, as Craven felt that they should have been approached as artists of the original material. Screenwriter Brian Hingeland was at New Line Cinema around Christmas 1987, shopping around his script named Highway to Hell, a pitch that was turned down by Shea and would not be realized until 1992. The company was desperate to get Nightmare 4 going, as they lacked both the script and director for the film at the time. Mike DeLuca begged Hingeland to try at it and come up with a script within 2 weeks. So he went to his parents' house and finished the script within 9 days, sending it to New Line with FedEx. Hingeland's script was a rewrite of William Constwinkle's original script. Ken and Jim Wheat, under the pseudonym Scott Pierce, were brought in next for further polishes. The Writers Guild of America credited the shooting script to Hingeland and the Wheat brothers, with Constwinkle and Hingeland receiving story credit. In an interview with Midnight's Edge, director Tom McLaughlin said that after completing Jason Lives, Friday the 13th Part 6, New Line offered him the job on The Dream Master. His one caveat was that he wanted creative control. The studio could not adhere to the demand, specifically because they had already begun filming without any director. And then McLaughlin said, quote, "When I finished Friday, I was offered Nightmare 4. I went to New Line, met with them, and I said, I love Freddy. I'd love to do one of these, but I really wanted to do what I just did, where I had creative control." He explained. And they go, "Well, we're already shooting." What? Yeah, we're already shooting. We're shooting like 2 different units for visual effects and something else, puppets or something. And I said, "Without a director?" "Yeah, we kind of know how we're going to make these things." And I went, "That's not the way I work." So I turned it down, which of course made Nightmare for director Rennie Harlin's career. Eventually, the director's work was given to Harlan, who had previously directed only 2 low-budget feature films, a Finnish action film, Born American, in 1986, and an American horror film, Prison, in 1987. Rachel Talalay claims that she and the other producers felt that since the audience was so familiar with Freddy Krueger at this stage, it would be harder to replicate the scare factor of the first 2 films. Instead, they continued the same vein of A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, rather than focus on pure horror. Harlan felt that Freddy had become the James Bond of the series, and the one audiences root for, saying, "We've reached a point where the audiences see Freddy as the hero. They come to these movies to hear his funny lines and see him do these amazing things. And because of that popularity, I'm faced with showing Freddy in a more heroic light and giving him more screen time. People will still fear him, but they also will be cheering him on." And with that, let's move on to A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master.
terror is.
Hello.
Do you live here?
Nobody lives here.
Real terror. How long has it been since you've been on Elm Street? Welcome to a brand new nightmare. He is the first in fear.
Will you help me? God, can someone help me, please?
Second to none.
Don't let them put you to sleep.
He has no mercy. And no equal.
Now no one sleeps.
Get ready. This August, your wildest dreams will come true.
How sweet, fresh meat.
A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4. The Dream Master.
A year after the events of the previous film, Kristen, Kincaid, and Joey have been released from Weston Hills and are back to their lives as normal teenagers with their families. However, Kristen, now played by Tuesday Knight, believes Freddy Krueger, still portrayed by Robert Englund, will come back, and when she dreams that she is in Freddy's old boiler room, she summons Joey and Kincaid into the dream. They are continued to be played by Rodney Eastman and Ken Sagos, respectfully. To reassure Kristen that Krueger is dead, Kincaid and Joey take her to Krueger's boiler room in the dream and show her that the boiler is cold. The next day, Kristen meets up with her boyfriend, martial arts enthusiast Rick Johnson, played by Andros Jones, and their friends, Rick's shy and quiet sister Alice, Sheila, an asthmatic genius, and Debbie, an athletic girl who dislikes bugs. They are played by Lisa Wilcox, Toy Newkirk, and Brooke Thies, respectively. Kincaid and Joey confront Kristen at school about the dream. They tell her that their days of fighting in dreams are over, and if she continues, she might accidentally bring Krueger back. That night, Kristen stays awake to keep herself from dreaming, but Kincaid falls asleep. He awakens in a junkyard, where Freddy has been accidentally resurrected. Kincaid fights Freddy, but Freddy overpowers him. Later, Joey falls asleep in his room, and he sees a model from one of his posters swimming in his waterbed. Freddy eventually comes up and pulls Joey into the waterbed and kills him. At school the next day, Kristen learns that Kincaid and Joey were found dead, and she later tells Rick, Alice, and Alice's crush, Dan Jordan, played by Danny Hassel, about Freddy, and vows to avenge Kincaid and Joey. Kristen realizes that her mother has put sleeping pills in her dinner and falls asleep as she tries to run out of the dining room. Kristen starts to dream. Freddy overcomes her attempts to repel him and forces her back to his home. Since Kristen is the last of the Elm Street children still alive, Freddy goads Kristen into summoning one of her friends into the dream so that his fun can begin anew. She calls Alice into her dream, and Freddy throws Kristen into his boiler. But before she dies, Kristen gives Alice her dream power. Alice wakes up with a sense that something is wrong and takes Rick to Kristen's house. When they arrive, they see that Kristen's bedroom is on fire with her in it. Later, Alice falls asleep during class and inadvertently brings Sheila into her dream. Freddy kills Sheila and makes it look like an asthma attack. Rick starts to believe Alice, but the following day, he has a dream where an invisible Freddy attacks him in a martial arts dojo. Rick fights him and manages to knock his bladed glove off. However, the glove levitates and stabs him to death. With each death, Alice changes. She gains the abilities and personalities of her dead friends. She makes plans with Debbie and Dan to fight and kill Freddy together, but when her father keeps her in, Alice falls asleep. Through Alice, Freddy stalks Debbie, transforms her into a cockroach, and crushes her in a roach motel. Using Debbie's temper, Alice tries to ram Freddy, but collides with a tree in reality, injuring Dan. As Dan is rushed into surgery, Alice returns home and readies herself to join him and face Freddy. In a dream, Alice rescues Dan, and the two find themselves in an old church. Dan gets injured in the dream, which prompts surgeons to wake him up. Alice now has to face Freddy alone. Freddy has the upper hand due to his experience, but she uses her friend's dream powers against him. When he is about to win, Alice remembers a nursery rhyme called The Dream Master. She recites it and forces Freddy to face his own reflection, which causes the souls within him to revolt. The strain tears Freddy apart. Alice's friends' souls are released and leave Freddy as a hollow husk. Months later, Dan and Alice are on a date when Dan tosses a coin into a fountain. For a moment, Alice sees Freddy's reflection in the water, but she ignores it. Dan asks her what she wished for, but Alice does not tell him as they walk away from the fountain. Now let's get to some trivia about A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, and learn some things about the behind the scenes, the production, and the actors. Wes Craven turned down New Line Cinema's offer to direct and rewrite the script. He couldn't direct the third one. He was directing something else. He came on to help write the script. I feel like once they knew that he wanted to go either like this kind of meta way with it or some other random way to kind of just end everything, I think that's when they were like, yeah, I know he kind of turned it down, but then I think he wanted to come back to it. I mean, he had an idea for a script. I think it was kind of mutual on both ends. I feel like Wes Craven at one point did want to come back and help after Dream Warriors, but I think New Line was like, we already kind of know what we want to do. We already kind of know where we're going with it. I'm sorry, and you're great, Wes, but we're gonna go this way, a way that's just gonna keep making us money. The name of the diner where Alice works is called the Crave Inn. And that's a reference to, obviously, the franchise creator, Wes Craven. And I like when they do things like that, where they throw in little things like that. Like in Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom, the club at the very beginning is called Obi-Wan's. And it's a reference to Star Wars, obviously. But like I like when they throw in little things, like little Easter eggs like that, where it's just like, oh, like this is named after this or that, or named after the writer or something, or they throw in little like cameo things like that. According to everyone interviewed about the movie in the documentary Never Sleep Again: The Elm Street Legacy, no one really knows why Patricia Arquette didn't come back. A few theories include her agent asking too much money, her being pregnant at the time, and her already committed to Far North, which was a film in 1988. Arquette commented on the issue in 2017. She said, quote, "They asked me to come back for Elm Street 4, but at the time I was starting to break into kind of meteor roles. I had just done a movie of the week about teen pregnancy called Daddy, and I was really liking getting deeper with my work. I love the horror genre and the Freddy franchise, but I was chomping at the bit to try other things as an actor." And I wish she would have come back. I mean, Tuesday Night does a pretty good job in this for taking over the role of Kristen. But I think it would have been good to have at least the continuity of Patricia Arquette coming back. And I know, and I get it. Like, yeah, like she says, she wants this bigger, like she wants these meatier roles, these roles that are going to give her more depth, more to challenge her than just like the same role from a previous one where she's just going to be killed off. And I feel like the reason why they killed her off more so was because they couldn't get Patricia Arquette back. I feel like if she had come back, they may have just, like, she would have taken over as the main protagonist to Freddy that Nancy was. But I think because then, Tuesday Night had to come in to replace her, and, it just didn't feel like the same character, or like maybe, they felt like audiences might feel like it's not the same. That's why they killed her off. And then they were like, okay, we'll have Alice take over and we'll see her come back again. But yeah, I love Patricia Arquette, and I think, good for her to get to wait and, get these better roles. But at the same time, it just kind of sucks too that she didn't come back, because she is a good actress. She won an Academy Award for Boyhood, which she does an amazing job in that film. And yeah, it would just have been pretty good, good to see her come back. Rick Johnson, who was played by Andrus Jones, was originally slated to die in a Freddy-induced elevator accident in the dream world. According to the producers, the scene had to be cut for budget concern reasons and was rewritten to the infamous karate dojo scene seen in the theatrical picture. And it kind of sucks when you kind of plan out for this this scene, and you have it, and obviously, but changing it obviously gives you something more. I mean, it's not it's the best kill or anything, but it is at least remembered by the fans. The scene, because it becomes a little bit more ridiculous of him fighting an invisible Freddy, and then the glove and all that. But sometimes it happens. Sometimes it happens when you're for budget concerns, or even just any kind of reason at all, where they're there's safety concerns too. Maybe they were maybe the elevator shaft or something might be, I don't know, maybe they couldn't build the set correctly and they didn't want to harm anybody, right? It could be any number of reasons, but sometimes it happens. Sometimes it gets rewritten and the scene becomes more ridiculous or more enjoyable or something else, just from that happening. That idea of this kind of turns things around for a scene, and sometimes it's for the better. During production, the writers, director, and producers couldn't figure out how to kill Freddy at the end of the film. Eventually, during a meeting, they discussed all the possible ways to kill a villain or creature in a film: shooting, stabbing, burning, etc. Then they realized that all of the methods they were thinking of came from external forces, and they decided to do just the opposite. Come up with a way for Freddy to be killed by an internal force. Thus, the concept of Freddy's reflection, causing the souls of his victims to revolt and tear them apart from the inside, and that was born. Honestly, I'll get to it in my final thoughts, but I'll give you a little snippet right here. I don't know if I like that idea at all. I get it's something different than what they said, but this is there's so many other ways I feel you could have done it, especially where we saw in the first one a very ingenious way of dealing with Freddy that I feel it wasn't captured more and wasn't utilized more, and I feel you could have brought something like that back. But I'll save it for my final thoughts. When Debbie finishes transforming into a cockroach inside the Roach Motel, it's actually Brooke Theus in the cockroach makeup / costume, as revealed in the TV documentary The Making of Nightmare on Elm Street 4. According to Theus, I might be pronouncing that wrong, I'm sorry. The entire sequence was easy to do. The only difficult part was for her was when Debbie pushes her roach body up and sees Freddy's eye looking inside because of how slippery the floor of the set was. This scene always freaked me out because I don't like bugs, especially cockroaches, and it's always grossed me out when this happens. But that's crazy. I actually didn't know that. Like, she got into like a full like costume of a cockroach to do that part. Like, that's crazy that it's not like a miniature, or it's not like, like claymation or something. It's like they actually put somebody in a giant costume and makeup and decided to shoot it like that, which is actually honestly, I'm so glad I was not on set for that, because that would have been disgusting. But you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of crazy that like they went out of their way for that. Honestly, you could have probably taken the budget from that and done something different and like put it towards other special effects or other parts of the budget. But like, honestly, kind of kudos to them for like actually going through with like building the costume and building out like this roach design for her. Kind of crazy. Kill Counter. And now we come back to the kill counter. Let's go through the kills and deaths in A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. So starting off, we get Kincaid and Joey. Their deaths come one after another. Kincaid is, when he falls asleep, he's stabbed in the gut 3 times with Freddy's finger knives. And then Joey, he's on his bed. He's got a water bed. And when he's laying there, he thinks he sees a model from one of his posters. And then that's when the model turns into, you guessed it, Freddy Krueger. And he's pulled under the water and killed with his finger knives. Then next we get poor Kristen. She's burned to death in a furnace fire in in the dream, but I think it's real, you know what I mean, like where that's where it crosses over to being actually in real life, and she dies and she gets burned to death. Then the next death we get to see is Sheila. She's taken into the dream with Alice because Kristen had given Alice her powers. I don't know how that really works for the film. Like, Alice is able to take these like powers into her, whatever. But she accidentally pulls Sheila in with her, and then that's when Freddy does the whole like makes it look like she's having an asthma attack, and it's actually he's like sucking the breath out of her, and then she dies. Then after that we get Rick Johnson, who is Alice Johnson's brother, and he gets stabbed in the gut with the disembodied finger knives. That after he fights Freddy in the dojo, the finger knives eventually come and disembody him, or whatever, you know what I mean? Like they stab him and oh no, my guts are falling out, no, and it guts him. And last we got Debbie Stevens, who as she's working out, I think she falls asleep, or is that how it is? Like, she falls asleep. She has to be asleep when that happens, right? And as she's working out, eventually Freddy shows up and morphs her into a cockroach, and then traps her in a roach motel and crushes it and kills her. And 7 kills in this one. So one more than the Dream Warriors, And you know what? I mean, there's some pretty good deaths in this one. Honestly, I think this one has maybe like the most so far we've seen. I can't remember how much the second one had. I don't think it had that many. Also, so this might be the most so far that we've seen in the franchise so far. So, Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, was released in 1988, and it had quickly became a financial success, and the highest-grossing film in the series to that point. And you know, I think this was the point where, you know, in the zeitgeist, Freddy was like as popular as he's gonna be, with the production of Freddy's Nightmares, which was a spin-off TV show, and all this merchandise available, and him showing up in other things, and like, you know, like now having 4 films, you know, like I think it's the same thing with like Jason and Michael Myers. You know, at a certain point, it's like, oh, we're just gonna keep doing this, huh? And so like I think people are like expecting more and more. The profile of the franchise was at its highest point thus far. So, screenwriter Leslie Bohem, as interviewed in the 2010 documentary Never Sleep Again, had originally pitched the basic storyline for the Dream Child to New Line executives during pre-production for the third film, Dream Warriors. New Line executive Sarah Risher was pregnant at the time and took exception to the idea of a newborn Freddy Krueger clawing his way out of a woman's womb. I mean, honestly, if I was pregnant too, I think that whole idea too would be like, yeah, we're not doing that. Like, that'd be too much of a freak out for me. But after giving birth, you know, she started to think that the storyline, about the storyline, and realized that the teenagers who watched the original film in '84 were now starting to grow up and have their own families, prompting the development of The Dream Child in late 1988. Pre-production was challenging primarily due to the frequently changing script. Director Stephen Hopkins recalled the bulk of the final film came from Leslie Bohem's script, although John Skipp and Craig Spector also added material, causing the Writers Guild of America to intervene when deciding ultimate credits, which is a whole another like topic you can get into about like the Writers Guild and the Directors Guild, because you have to give credit to specific people who work on it, but then like at the same time, just because you added to it doesn't necessarily mean you get credit too. But we'll move on from that. Bohem's original draft had Alice and her friends rehearsing a school performance of Medea, and said it was very weird. Director Hopkins was keen for the film to have more gothic imagery than its predecessor, which you'll see, or we'll see. Yeah, it really does, leading to the inserted footage of towers, castles, and dungeon-like asylum. And yeah, it very much has that gothic feeling. There's scenes where it's like, yeah. And just like a lot of films, especially the slasher films and horror films coming out around this time, especially because this was during, like I said, that Satanic Panic. This was like during the time where, you know, they were talking about how these movies influence, you know, kids to become serial killers and hurt people and hurt themselves and this and that, blah blah blah, and causes all this stuff, which we know nowadays. Now, at least rational people know that's not how that works. Like, it's not because of these films that like people are going around like causing mass destruction. It's a lot of other things. The final editing was challenging due to the demands made by the MPAA to reduce the on-screen violence, blood, and gore. The most altered sequences were those for Dan and Greta, which were edited down several times before a theatrical release with an R rating in the United States. And it's, yeah, like I said, like that's the whole reason why like Jason too, like would the Friday the 13th also would suffer from the MPAA coming in and saying, you need to cut this, you need to cut that. Which then, or even now, and I'm not sure if they still do that, but they don't really tell you what to cut or what was wrong with it. They just send it back and say, we're not approving it for R, and we're going to say it's an NC-17, and then you have to go through and cut things until then finally they're like, okay, yeah, that's R. And it could be any number of things. It could be the number of like swear words you use. It could be the amount of gore you show. It could be the amount of blood you show or not show, or this or that, or the color of the blood, or like the limbs, this and that. It's a bunch of bull walking. But now we get into A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child.
His mother was a God-fearing woman. His birth was an unspeakable horror.
Please don't let him do that!
His life and death have been one incredible nightmare. But now all that is going to change because Freddy wants to become a daddy.
Wanna make babies?
What's wrong with me? You just a little pregnant?
Even if he has to adopt.
Do unborn babies dream?
When it comes to chills.
It happened while I was awake.
When it comes to screams.
That part just start.
When it comes to pure terror.
Bon appetit.
No one delivers like Freddy. Better buckle up.
All right, Krueger. This time it's for keeps.
A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child.
It's a boy.
When it comes to terror, remember.
Another year has
Freddy
passed
knows
from
best.
the previous film. It's June 1989. Alice and Dan have started dating, and they are continued to be played by Lisa Wilcox and Danny Hassel, respectively. And there are no signs of Freddy Krueger. One day, while taking a shower after having sex with Dan, Alice has a vision of herself dressed in a nun's habit with a name tag saying Amanda Krueger at a strange asylum. She is attacked by patients at the hospital, but awakens, and the next day, Alice is graduating from high school alongside her new friends, Greta, played by Erica Anderson, an aspiring but reluctant supermodel, Mark, played by Joe Seeley, a comic book fan, and Yvonne, played by Kelly Jo Minter, a hospital volunteer and swimmer. Alice confides her nightmare to Dan, who tells her she is in control of her dreams. On her way to work, Alice finds herself back at the asylum, where she sees Amanda, played by Beatrice Bopel, giving birth to a gruesomely deformed baby. Amanda tries to collect the baby before it escapes, but it sneaks out of the operating room. Alice follows the baby into the church where she defeated Freddy in the previous film. The baby finds Freddy's remains and quickly grows into an adult, hinting to Alice that he has found the key to coming back. Alarmed, she contacts Dan, who falls asleep en route to see her. Freddy attacks and electrocutes Dan, turning him into a frightful man-slash-machine hybrid, before veering him into oncoming traffic. Alice sees Dan's body come to life and taunt her before she faints. Waking in a hospital, she hears the news of Dan's death and that she is pregnant with his child. During the night, she is visited by a young boy named Jacob, but the next day, Yvonne tells her that there are no children on her floor, nor is there a children's ward. Alice tells her friends about Freddy and his lineage. Yvonne refuses to listen, but Mark and Greta are more supportive. That afternoon, at a dinner party at home, Greta falls asleep at the table. She dreams of herself snapping at her mother and ranting over her controlling nature before Freddy arrives and forces Greta to eat her own organs before choking her in front of a laughing audience. In the real world, Greta falls down dead in front of her mother and their guests. Yvonne and Alice visit Mark, who's grieving Greta's death, and a rift forms between them. Mark falls asleep and is nearly killed by Freddy, but Alice saves him before seeing Jacob again. Jacob hints that Alice is his mother. Alice requests that Yvonne get her an early ultrasound and discover Freddy is using Jacob as a conduit to attack her friends even when she's awake, and has been feeding him his victims to make him like himself. Yvonne and Dan's parents still believe Alice is crazy. Dan's parents insist that she give them the baby when it's born, but Alice refuses. Alice and Mark research Krueger and the nun Amanda. Realizing Amanda was trying to stop Freddy, they investigate her whereabouts, and Alice goes to sleep, hoping to find Amanda at the asylum. While there, Freddy lures her away by threatening Yvonne, who has fallen asleep in a jacuzzi. Alice rescues Yvonne, who finally believes her. Mark falls asleep and is pulled into a comic book world, where after becoming a superhero to fight him, Freddy becomes a supervillain and turns him into a paper cutout and slashes him to pieces. Alice soon goes to bed to find Freddy and save her son. Realizing Freddy has been hiding in her every time she falls asleep, she draws Freddy out from within herself. Yvonne finds Amanda's remains at the asylum, and Amanda joins the fight in the dream world, encouraging Jacob to use the power Freddy has been giving him. Jacob destroys Freddy, and his infant form is absorbed by his mother, while Alice picks up baby Jacob. Warning Alice away, Amanda seals Freddy away in time. Several months later, Jacob Daniel Johnson is enjoying a picnic with his mother, grandfather, and Yvonne. Some children jumping rope nearby are humming Freddy's rhyme, hinting at Freddy's return. Let's dive in one last time for some trivia about A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, and learn some things about the behind the scenes, the production, and the actors. Executive producer Sarah Risher's original pitch to New Line Cinema for A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 was for Freddy to have a baby. Risher states, I went in, one of the executives was pregnant at the time, and I said, picture Freddy's clawing his way out of the womb. No one liked my idea. Now I got a call for Nightmare 5, and when they came to me, they said, remember what you wanted Freddy to have a baby? Well, we like that idea now. What if Alice was the mom? And honestly, that if it was like a half Freddy, half hers, it would make for a crazy interpretation of like essay and that kind of thing. And you could have tackled that maybe, but this idea that Freddy's using the baby to absorb the souls and get born that way, I guess makes sense. I don't whatever. I'll talk about it in my final thoughts, but yeah, I mean, it's just kind of weird when when you look at what the stories could have been and how it was going to be. But let's move on. Joe Seeley originally wanted his character Mark to be a goth, wanting jet black hair and wear bone shirts. He was upset that he had to wear more colorful clothes with blonde hair, which honestly, I think I agree with him. His character doesn't really fit to be. I mean, he is kind of like a nerdy kind of guy, I guess. But for him drawing in black and white and coming up with this character, I think that probably would have worked a little bit better, having him be more of a goth. He seems like he's the outcast, but he's got all these friends. And I know, and it would have been probably too stereotypical at the time for him to be like that, but I think they kind of miss the opportunity for that character to be more of a darker gothic character, especially when you wanted to go for gothic, the architecture of gothic, the way that the sets look. So I don't know, Kind of strange that she decided to go that way. In the original script, Alice's friends were named Dean, Jen, and Ginger. Dean was a boxer, Jen was an artist, and Ginger struggled with anorexia, with scenes of her throwing up to lose weight. They were later changed to Mark, Greta, and Yvonne. Mark was changed to a male character and became a comic book fan. And yeah, I mean, like I said, that's kind of the things that kind of happen with scripts over time. You know, like eventually, you know, you're gonna have these characters change from one to another. You're gonna have them go, you know, through different processes, become like have different things come up. It just fits whatever the budget's gonna fit. All death sequences were cut down significantly in order to avoid an X rating. Dan's original motorcycle death was longer and contained much more gore. Many sequences showing Dan's face racked in pain were cut, along with his screams and Freddy's laughter. Scenes which are seen on screen for only a few seconds are several minutes long on film. The entire sequence is much longer, and the timing of Freddy's quips are different. Greta's dinner scene was also edited. Originally, Freddy filleted the Greta doll with a claw glove, causing it to spurt blood everywhere, and then force-fed her its innards. Shots of the guests laughing were cut. Also, after Freddy said, "You are what you eat," she looked down and realized he had gutted her and was feeding her mush from her own stomach. This explains why Greta doll in Mark's dream is bleeding from its torso. Finally, Mark's demise is also cut. As Freddy shreds the paper in the unrated release, his face is animated and shows him screaming along with his cries of pain until Freddy cuts his paper head off. All three scenes can be viewed unedited in the original unrated VHS release. And it just goes to show you, like, yeah, like, as you go along in the series and you try and up the gore, you try and up the things that came before. At the same time, there's going to be someone like the MPAA or like a studio which is going to come back at you and be like, we want to turn it down. Like, we're just trying to, like, obviously the studio is just trying to make money. The MPAA is just there to be a hindrance, like always. And sometimes it just results in, like, yeah, like, this film seemed, I'm gonna get to my final thoughts, but like it feels like a lot of stuff was cut down and cut out from it, and that's all I'll say for now because I want to get into my final thoughts. So for now, let's move on. Kill. And now we go through the kill counter one last time. This is the part of the podcast where we go through kills and deaths in the film. So this one greatly diminished from the previous two. And even, I want to say even the first one, this only has 3 kills in the whole movie. And it just goes to show you, like, here's another of that, like, trimming and telling, you know, like, hey, if you guys keep adding more, you know, like, you could have made, like, way, like, I think what they wanted to do was have, like, fewer deaths, but with upped gore and amount of time and, you know, like, the amount of visuals and special effects, but then that all just gets cut because of the MPAA, or at least trimmed down, parsed down. The first one we see in the film is Dan. He gets fused with the motorcycle after he falls asleep in his truck, and the truck, in the dream, his truck gets turned over or something, or like gets taken over by Freddy, so he gets out, he takes over a motorcycle, and then eventually he realizes he's still in his dream, and he's getting fused into the motorcycle by Freddy, and then he crashes and he dies. The next one we see is Greta as she's sitting at the table eating dinner with her mom and all of her friends. That's when we find out she actually fell asleep. And then Freddy comes in like dressed like a chef and starts feeding her and overfeeding her and stuffing her up. And that's when she just chokes to death on like him feeding her all that stuff. And then last we have Mark, who gets slashed as he turns into like a superhero to fight Freddy, and then Freddy turns into a super villain to beat him, and he turns him into paper, and he starts slashing him up, and eventually he crushes him to death. And that's all the deaths we get in this film. It's not as like crazy as it was before, and like I said, I feel like there was more to these. I feel like Yvonne stayed alive to the end, but I feel like she could have died. Maybe it just added one more death. I think it just needed like maybe one more death to it, especially for this movie's not that long. And that's another thing I'm going to talk about in my final thoughts. But for now, those are the final kills for the final film of this episode. Alright, so now with 5 installments of the Elm Street franchise under their belt and considerable finances, New Line Cinema had earned that nickname, the house that Freddy built. Officially, you could have called it then back in like after the first one. But I think this actually, so after having after not just Nightmare on Elm Street and the second film, which didn't do as well, coming back with Dream Warriors, and then every year consistently after that, another Freddy. This really put them on the map as a player in the studio scene, right? So now, and they really earned that moniker of the house that Freddy built. The studio had expanded to develop other franchises. For example, like Critters and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So Bob Shea recalled later that it was time to move on and that they had other projects that they wanted to focus on. And the decision was made to make the 6th entry the final film in the Elm Street series. Director Rachel Talalay had produced most of the previous installments and was keen to helm the 6th film as its director. She also had a number of ideas that would help refresh the series, including not calling the title Nightmare on Elm Street Part 6 and incorporating more humor into this entry, into the next entry, which she felt was lacking from the previous films. And we'll see if that is a good payoff and whether or not that franchise will stay dead. Spoilers, it's not going to stay dead after the next one. But for now, that's where we kind of leave it. There's 5 films. It's already the end of the 80s. We're getting to the 90s where the 80s had this kind of run of being the era of slashers, right? You got Michael Myers, you got Jason Voorhees, you got Freddy Krueger. Then you got some of the lesser known, but they started to kind of come back. You got Leatherface, you got Pinhead, and Chucky had just started towards the end around this time too. I think there have been two Child's Plays at this time, and there's other series like Critters that are going on where all these other monster movies are also still happening, like The Thing and stuff, but they're not getting as much attention or credit that they deserve. That's a claim later. And this kind of fatigue of the slasher is going to hit really hard when we get to the next film and the next installment, and when we get to what comes after that, and we'll see this kind of shift, and we'll see what Wes Craven decides to do, and then from there it gets into like this really weird time period for not just slashers, because then you'll get this kind of we'll get a kind of like a reboot, like a reset for things, but it'll be part of this other trend that we'll see later. But for now, let's get into my final thoughts. Alright, so A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. I love it. Honestly, I think that's such a great film. I think it's probably the best of the series besides the first one. It's so good. I think it was well done. Like, having Wes Craven back is what really kind of feels like this is a Nightmare on Elm Street again. Having Nancy back, it needed somebody like from... And I mean John Saxon, who's back, right? But having these characters come back, to kind of tie it back, and especially because it's about the kids from Elm Street, right? And having to deal with this monster who haunts Elm Street. Like like the first two were set on Elm Street, right? And because you decided to name it A Nightmare on Elm Street. But then you have to start getting further and further away, right? And I mean, you don't have to, but in order to keep things more fresh, I mean, that's why they took it to Western Hills. But at least you still tied it back, because it was like, oh, these are the kids that are still tied to that idea of being on Elm Street, and then the ones who did what they did to Freddy. And I think I mean, it's just memorable, the kills, like him controlling the one guy with the puppets, with sleepwalking, and he's got the tendons, and oh man, and then he just like cuts them and he throws them off, and even just like the other kills where like she gets her head smashed into that's such a iconic scene, and that's an iconic line now. You're ready for prime time, bitch, or whatever he says, and then. Just like the using the drugs as his fingers, that's like crazy. That's crazy. Some of the other kills aren't as great, aren't as like memorable. But I think like having this idea of like, oh, you got to put his body to rest because he's an evil person. You got to use holy water, and that they buried him in this junkyard. It's a really clever idea. Like, where else would you put a monster like Freddy's bones other than like someplace where no one could ever find them, in a junkyard, right? Where no one's ever going to suspect a thing to look for them. And the fact that they have to go back, unbury him, purify his bones, and then bury him again. And it's just kind of crazy that like this film was ever like pulled together, and it's just got so many great like people, like I mean Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon, but then Patricia Arquette, like I said, Lawrence Fishburne's in it. They're all great. This ensemble works together. I wish they would have gotten a little bit more into the that like dream power idea a little bit more, and maybe shown a little bit more. Here's like my gripe about all three of them is that they're a lot shorter than I remember them being. Maybe it was just me being a kid and like thinking, oh, like I didn't think they were long, but I thought that when I sat there and I started watching them, I was like, these are a lot shorter than these are only like an hour and like maybe an hour and a half, maybe. And I was like, these are a lot shorter than I remember them being. I wish this one was a little bit longer. I kind of wish it was the last one, to kind of give you that satisfying ending. But, this overall, This one was a solid sequel. This was, like I said, it's probably one of the best of the franchise. So I'm gonna give it like 5 stars because it's really that good. Like I said, here and there there's a couple things, but overall it's a pretty good one. It's like I'd watch it again. I remember watching it as a kid, and it stuck with me. The whole, like most of the kills in this, I was like, oh yeah, I remember all this. But yeah, let's move on to A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. And this one, I kind of remembered, and then as I was watching, I was like, yeah, I remember. This is the one that I rented as a kid, and I did not want to finish watching, and my parents got mad that I didn't want to watch it. It's because I don't like bugs, and I don't like cockroaches especially. And I got to the part where she started turning in, and I was like, oh my god, this is terrible. Like, what am I watching? And I had to stop it, and I didn't want to watch it. It scared me. And so, but then I watched it now. I mean, I've seen I've seen the end before, so I already knew how it ended. But yeah, like really that one scene just kind of turned me off. But as I'm watching it, I'm like, this really isn't that memorable. Other than the Roach Motel thing, it's like, I think for what it is, it's fine. I like the idea of like, I really wish that Patricia Arquette had come back. But Tuesday Night does like I said, she does a pretty good job, taking over for Patricia Arquette. I just wish that like they would have just stuck with her as the main character, but I could see why, if Patricia Arquette's not going to come back, why you would switch it to Alice. And then it's just weird that like, in order for that to happen, like they have to give Alice like everyone else's powers. That was a little like, okay. But I do like that there was a part where like it kind of loops back, and you're like, wait, what? Why is something wrong? And because I remember being a kid, and I think that happened to me too, where like it's the scene where they're trying to get to the one friend who's turning into a roach, and they get into she comes up to Dan and is like, we gotta go, and like, I'll drive, and she gets in the car, and then it loops back through, like she's like, oh, we gotta get to her, let's get in the car, and then I'll drive, and then it does it again, and it's like, wait, is something wrong, and is this skipping or something? And it turns out no, they're just dreaming, and Freddy's got them in like this kind of loop. And honestly, I think this one was fine. I thought that overall it was pretty okay. I like that they introduced Alice in this one, and she's kind of this shy kind of girl, and that it takes all this for her to like really fully like understand herself and come out of her shell. I mean, a lot of her friends have to die, and it does kind of suck that they like killed off like Kincaid and Joey like right away, to just kind of get, I feel like they like it was the same thing with like Kristen, where it's like they were trying to pull these people back in, but then they decided, let's just kill them off so then we can start a clean slate. When I wish maybe like they had survived at least till like the end and then died or something. Maybe at least Kincaid or something. But overall, I think I'm gonna say that this one gets a 3 out of 5. Like it's not a. It is like what you think of as a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but it's not as good as like the Dream Warriors. It's not as good as the first one, and we're gonna see that like with the next one, it's just downhill from here. So let's get into A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. And this is the one where I'm like, okay, I can see all the expounding things that were coming from all the previous sequels and everything. Everything just compounds into it being a shorter film. The gore and effects are cut down, budget's cut down. Everything's just like trimmed to be like so neutral and neutered. and they just keep upping the quips and the funny things that Freddy says, and he's talkative here more and there, and just like the more ridiculous ideas of like with the baby and like this and that, and then like he just keeps coming back, and like this time they don't even really explain how he comes back. I mean, they kind of say that it's like with the baby, but then it's like, but how did he latch onto the baby to begin with? And then it's like, but does he need to be born with the baby for him to come back, or is it just that how's the baby absorbing the souls? I don't know. I know that's like nitpicking and overthinking, a Friday, a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but you can totally tell that like this is where they were like at their like you only can go so far with a Nightmare on Elm Street, where you can like with Jason, like you can take him to Manhattan, like we saw. You can take him to hell. You can move him anywhere, and it would still be a pretty good, solid Friday the 13th film, because he's a monster who's just gonna keep going at it. Either way, Michael Myers the same way. You put him somewhere else, like in an asylum, or you take him across country to California. He's gonna be nonstop on his way to that place. Freddy is limited in this kind of dream realm, and then when you decide that you're like, oh yeah, we're gonna defeat him by purifying his bones and burying him again, and that did it. And then now you have to create this whole other reason for him to come back, where it was like the dog desecrated like his grave by peeing on it. I don't know. And so then, he desecrated the corpse. Okay, I guess you could say that could bring him back. And then now it's just like, baby's gonna be born, so Freddy's gonna come back. It's just like you're already like getting to the fringes and the edge of where you can logically take an idea about Elm Street and the kids on Elm Street, and after a certain point, it's like you could have just like, I think that's why I think the next the title, they should have done something like that. They shouldn't have called all of them A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1, not Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4. Like, I feel like if you had just done like The Dream Master, A Nightmare on Elm Street film, or something, like, I feel like then you could, or like The Dream Child, A Nightmare on Elm Street film, or something like, or like Freddy and the Child. I don't know. Like, I feel like there's only so far, and like you have to have certain conditions. I get that, like you have to sleep, right? But like the thing is, that's it. That's when Freddy can get you. With Jason, Michael, Chucky, Pinhead, Leatherface, all these other ones, like it can be the middle of the day. It could be you're at school. It could be you're at work. It could be you walking through the woods. It could be you out on the shore of the lake. It could be, you know what I mean, all these other places. And if you happen to fall asleep, then Freddy can get you. And we'll see that in another installment we'll get to. But honestly, I don't know. There's not even that many deaths and kills in this one. It's like like I said, they got to like the end of the rope, and they're like, I feel like that's why they were like, let's just make the next one the last one, because there's only so much you can do. There's only so many like ideas with this, and without like actually sitting down and coming up with like a creative idea. Like there's gonna be an entry that is a creative idea to take it, and honestly, I think that would have worked for a whole nother series. And there's another entry too where like I think that would have worked also for more sequels, but then that gets into its own whole legal thing and was a strain to put together. But yeah, no, this one really did not feel, it felt very rushed. It felt very like put together, very like let's just get it out. It's just because, like I said, like they're back to back. I didn't realize that it was literally like 87, 88, 89, and it's just like you can tell, like the quality gets worse. Because at least with Dream Warriors, they took their time to make that one, right? Then you get to the next one, and it's just like, within a year, and then the next one within a year of that. And it's like they just took like older ideas too, and it's like, well, what if he's a baby and he can be born or something? I don't know. And then the whole thing, like, like his mom comes back and takes him in her and seals them away in time and stuff. I don't know. Whatever. It's like, these are this string right here I would count as like a little mini trilogy. Like, this would be, I think, like the Thorn trilogy, or like the Tommy Jarvis trilogy. Yeah, Tommy Jarvis trilogy, where like it has its own little run of like, okay, these three films are connected because we go with Kristen to the next film, and then we go from Alice to the next film. And it's just like these ones are just not that great. I mean, no, sorry. This one, the Dream Child, is not great. I mean, we're gonna see one that's a couple that are a little bit worse, but for now, I'm gonna say a 2 for this one. 2 out of 5, because it is just not what I wanted in a Nightmare. If I had been during that time, going to see these as like a teenager or early adult, or even as maybe early teen, preteen, I think maybe I might have liked it, but I think I would have been fully like disappointed. Like, that's what we got. There wasn't even that much gore. I don't know. I'm kind of glad that we're done with these ones, because we're gonna finally get to at least one that's a little bit. It's not that great, but like it's a little bit more interesting, and then one that's a really good concept, and then we'll get to the remake. But for now, did you like that Nancy return only to be killed off? What dream power did you want? Or do you want? Is Freddy getting too quippy by the end? Maybe, but that's, I think, what we love about him. We want to thank you all for listening, and if you like what you hear, please subscribe to get every new episode downloaded. Do you have any personal or fictional, paranormal, supernatural, or unexplainable stories? We'd love to read them on the podcast. Please send your stories, recommendations, or anything else to horrorboxpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to show more support, you can follow us on our socials on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, @Horrorbox Podcast, and also got a Discord, guys. It should be out. It should be @Horrorbox Podcast as well. If you like, I think the link is going to be in the description. Also, you can buy me a coffee at coffee.com/horrorboxpodcast. That really helps out. We'll see you next time, and hear what comes out from the horror box.
Can I ask you something?
Certainly.
Who gives a fuck what you think? This is it, Jennifer. Your big break in TV. Welcome to prime time, bitch.